Welcome to Friday Tech Tips for Knitters. This is week 3 and today it's all about increasing. Different methods for increasing, improving your technique, and the pros and cons of each one. I'm going to demonstrate the various methods and then I will just explain what garments or projects you would want to use that method for. So here's a sample of the most common increase. So this is called knitting into the front and back, or abbreviated as KFB, or on the purl rows it would be PFB. As you can see, it's leaving just a little bit of a raised bump. No holes. It's most often used when transitioning from a ribbed border, say at the bottom of your sweater, to stocking stitch. When you do this type of increase along the top of a ribbing, you won't notice the bumps. So it's the type of increase you can do, but preferably not when you're in plain stocking stitch, such as this sample. So I will start demonstrating that one first. Maybe you want to follow along and try the techniques on your own sample, or play it back later and practice a little bit. Does everybody have a favorite way of increasing? I know I have my favorite. Okay, so I'm going to knit in 4 stitches, and I am a continental knitter, so I hope that doesn't confuse you with the yarn placement. So I've knit 4 stitches from the edge. I'm going to knit into the next stitch, but I'm not going to slip it off the needle quite yet. Oops, try that again. So I've come through the stitch. Now I'm going to swing my right needle around to the back of the stitch and knit through the back loop. Now that I've created the second stitch, I can slip both off together. So it makes a little bundle, and you can see there is a bar that resembles a purl. But at least we don't have a hole. Okay, I'm going to knit till I'm 4 stitches from the edge. And then I'll try it again on the knit side. Okay, so in this case, if I had started 4 stitches in from the beginning, I've done my increase actually in the 5th stitch. I want to leave the 5 stitches remaining on the needle and work my increase into the 5th stitch. So I'm going to knit through, swing my right needle to the back, and picking up the bar at the back of the knit stitch, bring the yarn around and through. So 2 stitches come off together. I'll knit to the end, and then we'll try it on the purl side. So you can get away with this type of increase in moss stitch, garter stitch, or ribbing. Any sort of pattern stitch that gives you a texture. The little bumps will not be noticeable. So if you were picking up stitches around a neckline and you didn't pick up enough stitches, you could easily do knit into front and back to do your increases on the first row, whether it's garter stitch, ribbing, or a moss stitch border. So now I'm going to purl 4 stitches in, and I'm going to purl the next stitch, leave it on my needle, and this is the tricky part. You really have to bring the needle points together, and you have to pick up the back of the purl stitch and bring it towards you. So you can't purl into the front as usual. That will undo the first part of the increase. You have to catch the back bar and purl through the back loop. just like doing gymnastics with knitting needles. And now we're going to purl to 4 stitches from the end and leave 1 extra stitch on the needle so that our increase is made before the 4 stitch border. Okay, so I've got 4 stitches for my border. This will be my increase stitch, number 5. Purl through the front, bring the needle points towards you so you can grab the back bar and purl through it. Okay, it's a little hard to see quite yet, but there is a bump for the purl row and the knit row. Now we're going to try my favorite increase, which is called Make One. There is a Make One right and a Make One left. It's a directional stitch, and most patterns will tell you when to do the Make One right or the Make One left. So this time I'm just knitting in 2 stitches from the edge, and I'm going to do a Make One right. Make One right is looking for the horizontal bar between the 2 stitches and lifting it onto your left needle, back to front. So once again, horizontal bar that connects the 2 stitches on your working needles, pick it up on the left needle, back to front. And I'm going to knit into the front of that stitch. Now the way that I remember if I'm doing a Make One right or a Make One left is that the direction that I'm knitting in is bringing my knitting needle to the right, not to the left. So if you're pointing your knitting needle to the right when you go into the bar, that confirms that you're doing a Make One right. This type of stitch, increase stitch, will not leave a hole. It just leaves a little crisscross between the 2 stitches. It sits very flat, and it is most often used on top-down shawls, pullovers, cardigans. It's a very popular increase for sleeves, and it looks extra neat on sleeves or say the body of a sweater if you work it 2 stitches from the edge, not 1. That way 1 stitch is used as your seam stitch for sewing, and then you've got a nice straight stitch, and then you've got your Make One. So even if the pattern doesn't mention work the increases 2 stitches in, you can always modify it to your own liking. So now we'll try the Make One left, which will be 2 stitches from the end of my row. Okay, I've got 2 stitches remaining on my left needle. This time to do a Make One left, I'm picking up the horizontal bar connecting the 2 working stitches. I'm picking it up from front to back on my left needle. This time I'm not knitting into the front of the stitch like we did at the beginning of the row. I'm knitting into the back of the stitch. And just to confirm, I know I'm doing the left Make One because I'm knitting with my needle pointed to the left. If I'm knitting this way, I'm doing the right Make One. So needle pointed to the left, this is Make One left. Also referred to in patterns as M1L, and our first increase at the beginning was M1R. So this particular increase can be worked on purl rows as well. This time I'll work 4 stitches in, so I'm not right over top of my previous increase. Okay, so this time we're doing make one right on the purl row. So I'm going to put my left needle front to back under the horizontal bar, and I'm going to bring the needle tips towards me because I have to do that tricky maneuver. I have to purl into the back of the bar. So that is purling through the back loop of the bar. And then we'll zip across till we're 4 stitches from the end, and we'll do make one left. And the reason we're doing this type of make one purl ways is so that the direction of your increase matches on the knit row and the purl row. Who knew knitting was so technical? Okay, so I'm 4 stitches from the end, and I'm going to try and make one left. This time I'll do back to front. So I'm picking up the horizontal bar back to front on the left needle, and I'm going to purl as normal into the front of the bar. And then we'll just purl to the end. So the make one type of increase has quite a bit of stretch because it's not worked in a stitch, it's worked in between the stitches. And I will show you on my sample. So again, if you look closely, you'll see this was knitting into the front and back. You see the little purl bumps. Even though you're not purling, it does create a little purl bump right along here. And the make one just has a slanted bar, nice and neat on both sides. I've done it 4 stitches in on each side here, and the purl side is pretty much invisible. So if you're looking for an all-round go-to type of increase, then stick with the make one right or the make one left. For an example, this is a top-down shawl with a center spine. So the center stitch is knit, right side and wrong side rows. And to create the triangular effect, there is a make one increase on each side of the center spine stitch. So it creates a really interesting detail, but also doesn't leave any holes. And you can see the direction of the stitch is always going in the same way. That's your increase stitch here and your increase stitch here. So that is a very popular increase used on shawls. We also use it on the edge of the shawl, 2 stitches in. So we've got the make one right, 2 stitches in here, and then we've marked the center spine with a marker on both sides of that stitch. And then we do a make one left. Right before the first marker, we knit our center spine stitch, slip our marker, and then we do a make one right. And at the end of the row, 2 stitches before the edge, we do a make one left. So for a shawl, you do need to use your directional type of increases. Okay, and the third sample I want to show you is probably the least popular or the least known type of increase. So this is called the lifted increase. It is also a directional increase. There is a right lifted increase made on this side and a left lifted increase made on this side. in a pattern, if the designer calls for this type of increase, there's usually a good reason why she prefers it or he prefers it. And the abbreviation is RLI, sorry, RL1, right lifted 1 and left lifted 1. It does create a nice decorative line, and it does lie flat, there is no bump, but it's not advisable to use on yarns such as cotton or linen or a hemp mixture because it doesn't have the elasticity. And once I demonstrate it, you'll see exactly why there is no elasticity. The other problem with this type of increase is you cannot work it on consecutive rows. The first 2 increases I did show and demonstrate, we were able to do it on knit rows and purl rows. But the nature of this increase, you can work it on the knit row, but then you have to purl back to reconcile the stitch, and then you can work it on the second row, so the following knit row. It is used on raglan shapings, so top-down sweaters, side shaping on a garment, sleeve increases. Once in a while you'll see it in a shawl pattern. Okay, so we're going to knit in, let's see, I better do 3 stitches this time to get away from my previous increases. So we've worked in 3 stitches. Now instead of doing our make one, which is using the horizontal bar connecting the 2 stitches, we're going to be working with the right leg of the stitch below the one on the needle. So the first loop you see is your current row of stitches, and that little V shape below it is your second row. So this is what's referred to as the right leg of the stitch, and then the opposite side is the left leg. So we are picking up with our right hand needle the back of the right leg. We're going to lift that onto the left needle. I usually use my thumb to keep the 2 separated, the actual working stitch and the leg. Sometimes they will crisscross and then you're not sure which is which, so try to keep them separated. And then we're just going to knit it as a regular stitch, and then we knit our working stitch. So that's our first increase. Now we'll work till we are 3 stitches from the end of the row, and we'll do the left lifted increase. Has anyone tried this particular type of increase before? Are you a fan of it, or do you prefer the make one? Okay, now I'm 3 stitches from the end. This time we're going to be picking up the left leg of the stitch. Beginning of the row, remember we picked up the right leg. Now we're picking up the left leg. The only thing different is we have already knit our working stitch. So instead of picking up the obvious left leg in the stitch below the one on the needle, we have to go 1 row lower. So if you're counting down, that's 1, 2, 3. So go to the 3rd leg, pick it up back to front, and then we're going to knit into the back. That way we haven't twisted the stitch and it will lie flat. And then we knit to the end. So again, we cannot do the right and left lifted increase on the purl row following the knit row. It's far too tight if it's supposed to be lined up in the same spot. I mean, we could do it in the middle of the row, but that just doesn't line up with our increases. And the reason we cannot do it on the purl rows is because the yarn doesn't have enough elasticity to be pulled up one extra row. So I'll let you have a look at yeah. Unfortunately, you can't feel this, only I can feel the tension, but it is a very tight increase. So you could imagine if you were doing this type of increase all the way along a raglan sleeve edge, you wouldn't get exactly the same stretch in measuring as you would with the make one or front and back increase. So it's really used much more rarely than the other types. Now the final way of increasing, you thought I was done, but I'm not. The final way of increasing is a decorative method. Very simple to do, and it is a particularly stretchy method. So I'm going in 4 stitches. It's as simple as a yarn over, which I'm sure you've done in your regular knitting. So we bring the yarn to the front and over the right needle to the back. So by doing a yarn over, we have increased a stitch and we're creating a bit of a lace edge. We'll do one at the end to match, and then I'll show you on a couple of projects just how pretty it looks as an increase. Some of the designers now are incorporating the yarn over increase into lace work, such as on a yoke of a top-down pullover. So I'm 4 stitches away from the edge. I'm going to do a yarn over and knit to the end. Because we're not increasing into the previous row, we're just increasing by creating a new stitch as a yarn over. That gives a much more relaxed, loose increase. So let me show you how pretty it is on a shawl. This is a top-down crescent-shaped shawl called Muskoka Magic. And it has not a center spine, it has 1, 2, 3 spines all together. And it also has the yarn over increase at the beginning of the row, 2 stitches in, and the end of the row, 2 stitches in. So to create this type of increase, we have 2 center stitches marked for each spine, marker on each side, and then we simply knit up till we're right before the marker, do a yarn over, slip the marker, knit 2 for your spine, slip the next marker, and a yarn over. So by doing that across one row, we've created 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 increases for each row. This is not worked on every knit row, it's worked on every 4th knit row. So it's very decorative, and as you can see with my hands pulling, it has a lot more stretch than some of the other increases. The only time we wouldn't use the yarn over as a decorative increase is on something that requires a larger needle. This is worked on about a 4.5 or 5 millimeter, so that's about the highest needle size you'd want to go. And the reason for that is the yarn overs become quite large and loose and stretchy. Then they don't look as pretty as you imagined. So particularly good for fingering weight. This is a fingering weight. Very nice on baby sweaters for the raglan edge of a top-down cardigan or pullover, and very nice on adult garments when using a fingering weight tension. It can also be incorporated into a pattern, such as this pretty one called Yume. That's our featured pattern this week in our Wednesday video, and it's available in Ravelry, and we have the gradient yarn in store. So this particular designer, Isabel Kramer, wanted the increases to be very loose and decorative. So she incorporated yarn overs into various rows without adding a knit two together, which is the most common in lace work. Usually when you do a yarn over, you do a knit two together or slip one, knit one, pass one over. So that way you've got more stitches each time you've done a yarn over row, and it's also part of her pattern. So the last step with the yarn over increase is to decide on your next row, do you want to leave it as a yarn over so it's decorative, or do you want to close it in? So because I'm working with a very chunky yarn and a 6mm needle, and I think for a winter sweater I really wouldn't appreciate having a row of holes all the way down the raglan shaping, I think I would want to close it in. So that's the nice part about this increase. You can decide on the next row if you want to leave it as large as this or close it in. I'm going to close it in, so that means instead of purling through the stitch, which creates a larger hole, I'm going to purl through the back of the stitch. So in essence, we've created a make one stitch, but it has a lot more give. So we'll do the same at the end, and then it's completely invisible. You'll never be able to tell where the yarn over first took place. And there is something I should mention. If you're following a pattern and it's asking you to increase, say, in every fourth stitch across the top of a ribbing before you transition to the body, that means they're asking you to do a knit front and back method of increasing. So if you are changing that, modifying it to your liking and deciding to do a make one increase, which is worked in the bar between the stitches, you'll have to compensate for how often you do the increase, because if it's worked into every fourth stitch and you're changing it to the bar in between, that means in essence you're really working one more stitch. So always take that into consideration. So here we've got the yarn over increase. I've decided to close it in to match the one at the beginning. So I'm going to purl through the back loop and then finish my row, and then I'll flip it over so you can see it is invisible. There we go. It just looks like a regular make one. Just has a little bit more stretch, and that's important again in a lot of the summer yarns that are not elastic, like the merinos and the llama and the alpaca blends. So if you're knitting with a cotton blend, a bamboo blend, a linen blend, try the make one or the yarn over and then close it in on the next row. So those are all my tech tips for this week. I hope you got some useful information, and please join me next week, same time on Friday, and I will feature some other tech tips. I'm not sure what they are yet, but I'm always happy to have your suggestions, so please leave any ideas in the comments for me. Thanks so much for watching, and enjoy your weekend.